Well, today on the show, I'm joined by Carl-Johan Palmqvist. Carl-Johan is a philosopher and researcher over in Sweden, and he's written some fascinating papers exploring the idea of embracing the divine without necessarily adhering to all the creeds and propositions that one would classically have to adhere to be a believer. We explore two different spaces today, the first one being religious fictionalism and the second one being non-Doxasticism. Don't worry, both of these are drilled into and explored in the conversation, so I won't bore you with the ins and outs of them right here, but needless to say, it's a fascinating conversation exploring how one can embrace the divine without necessarily adhering to a strict set of moral and theological propositions in a specific religious tradition. If it's your first time checking out the show, I'd ask you to hit the subscribe button, and then if you select the bell notification icon, that's going to remind you whenever we release a video here on the channel. And if you wouldn't mind giving it a thumbs up, then sharing it with your friends, your family, your followers. We grow because you take the time to share our content. So please do share this one with anyone who you think would find it to be a helpful and interesting dialogue. All right, enough of that. Enjoy this conversation with Carl-Johan Palmqvist as we explore embracing the divine. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the show. My name's Samuel and today I'm joined by Carl-Johan Palmqvist. Carl-Johan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to have been invited.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation. You've written some fascinating papers. We're going to dive into all of that stuff today. But before we do, would you mind giving my audience a bit of an overview about you and the work that you do within philosophy?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a philosopher based at Lund University in Sweden, and my main area of philosophy is where I've done most of my work is about beliefless approaches to religion, which we will be talking about today, such as fictionalism and Non-Doxasticism. But I've also done a bit of work in related areas such as the analysis of hope or the philosophy of John Schellenberg. So yeah.
Very nice, very nice. And how long have you been at the university for there in Sweden?
Well, I'm like 8 years, I think. 9.
Nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
I started 2016, so it's more or less.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, so I think it would be useful then to kind of begin to lay the groundwork for this conversation. It'd be helpful, I think, to kind of begin to explain and explore the sort of concept of religious fictionalism and how that sort of bridges this sort of atheism or naturalism with the sort of participation in religious life. Would you mind kind of just giving us the sort of scene setting behind that?
Yeah. I mean, fictionalism is an approach to religion which does not require belief at all. It's compatible with outright atheism and philosophical naturalism, where you don't believe in anything beyond the natural world. So it's a way for which allows everybody to participate in religion, even the atheist. And it works by treating religious language as fictional and religious life as a game of make-believe. So if you're an atheist, you can still engage religion and have a religious life, perhaps not the same religious life as the believer, but really fruitful engagement with religion, where you, by the means of imagination and pretense.
Now, we're going to dive into sort of kind of the idea of, I guess, role-playing in due course. But I think sort of even kind of a sort of question before that, which I think would be quite helpful, is just to understand kind of what do you think would motivate an individual to want to actually adopt a sort of fictionalistic approach to religion? I mean, you'd look at online, many atheists, they're almost sort of anti-religion in their sort of spiel or their sort of way of looking at the world and engaging with content. So would you say it's kind of primarily philosophical? Is it just practical? Is it psychological? Like, what's the motive behind this, do you think?
Well, I would say that it's, I think it's a bit of all three, actually. I mean, first of all, no one adopts fictionalism if they think that religion is real, or even possibly real. So that's the philosophical part. You need to have some philosophical reasons to believe that there is no true religion, or at least that no religion that you know of is the true religion. And secondly, I think you would have to have some psychological need that you think religion could fill, or at least it would be reasonable to assume that most who engage with religions fictionalists have some such reason. Like perhaps you want to grow as a person, or achieve some spiritual or moral growth. And now these things that you want will also, or in most cases, also be your practical reasons for participating in fictional religion. Or at least that's the standard picture that most philosophers who work with fictionalists assumes, that it is moral or spiritual reasons behind it. But really, I think that anything you can get out of a religious engagement could be your practical reasons for being a fictionalist. Obviously, you cannot expect to get things out of religion which requires religion to be real. So that's an obvious limit. But things associated with religion, like spiritual or moral growth, or whatever you can get out of it, could be your practical reasons for taking on the fictionalist approach.
Yeah, I mean, as I was reading some of your work, I was kind of thinking about my own life, my own sort of kind of journey, and how I almost kind of have to play various roles myself anyway. They aren't necessarily fictions, but, you know, I'm a dad, I'm a manager, I'm a husband, I'm a friend. There are loads of different sort of positions that I find myself within, almost at times having to act out the part of being a parent, or act out the part of being a friend if somebody's grieving maybe, or whatever it is. I'm sort of almost playing a role, but I'm embodying it and I'm fully believing that it's also a true role. Whereas religious fictionalism seems to be a different sort of thing. So I think it'd be quite helpful in especially in the context of religious fictionalism, to ask how we should define and think about this idea of role-playing within this space.
It's I mean, one of the main differences between playing a role as a fictionalist and playing a role, the kind of roles we play in our everyday lives, is that we play it in relation to a fiction and what we believe to be useful description of the world, but not a true description. And there's often made an important distinction between role-playing per se and role-playing game. And they would say that the while all role-playing games contain role-playing, not all role-playing is a role-playing game. And what's interesting with religious fictionalism is that it goes beyond the mere role play, which we often conduct in various circumstances, and it comes very close to the kind of role playing we find in role playing games, since it relates to fictional reality. So in a sense, it is more like playing an elf in Dungeons and Dragons than playing the dad role for your kids.
That's really, really cool. I mean, I sunk about 200 hours into Baldur's Gate 3 last year. I've been trying to stop myself from starting a new campaign recently as well in 2025. It's intense.
Well, yeah, really good.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm excited for Larian Studios and whatever they produce next. So let's kind of stick with this idea of kind of role playing then. So kind of obviously the person that's playing Dungeons and Dragons doesn't think they're a wizard or a whatever. They are aware that they're kind of enacting or pretending or pretensing into something, and the thing they're going into is almost like a sort of a fake world, a fake universe, you would almost say. Whereas obviously kind of religion, it's almost realist in its sort of traditions, in its sort of ways of coming about and engaging with the world. So I just want to kind of just push down a little bit further into this, I guess. Like, how does the lens of role-playing help fictionalists engage with realist religious traditions?
Well, I would say that one of the things that the role-playing perspective does, or if the fictionalist is aware that of these similarities with role-playing and try to use them to navigate her stance against with religion, I would say that it helps to understand what she's doing. It gives a plausible interpretation of her own engagement with religion. And other philosophers who write about fictionalism, but without the role-playing perspective, they often struggle to understand how religious actions can be motivated on fictionalism. It's often claimed that you need independent reasons from outside the fictions to act in the fiction if you're a fictionalist. And I would say that taking the role-playing perspective on fictionalism completely solves these questions, because when you engage as a role player in a fiction, you do not need any ulterior motives from outside the fictions to take action. So you don't need any ulterior motives to pray or partake in worship besides the fictional reasons you have within the fiction as a fictional worshipper. And it will make as little sense to demand such reasons as it would do to demand for you to have any reason from outside Baldur's Gate when for doing actions within Baldur's Gate. I mean, that would just be ridiculous, right? And I think that this is an advantage of the role-playing perspective, that it clearly shows this to the and that it shows that the question whether or the idea that we need ulterior motives for fictional actions is misguided.
I guess as well, kind of, we haven't spoken about this, but in your paper, especially on religious fictionalism, you talk about LARPing, which is live action role playing. For those who don't know, where people might do it for an afternoon, or they might do it for a longer period of time, maybe a weekend or a week or whatever, which is where somebody will kind of embody a character. They'll go out into, it could be a woods, or it could be kind of like maybe a little village somewhere that's been kind of rented out, or some space basically, and there'll be a sort of game that everybody comes together and plays, and everybody kind of lets go of themselves and begins to instantiate these characters basically, and you have almost like a Dungeons and Dragons experience, but in the real world. And I think what's really interesting about looking at things like Dungeons and Dragons or LARPing is that they have worlds that have rules and regulations. They might be fantastical, as in they have dragons and they have spells and they have incredible things that we don't have on Earth today. But what's really interesting is, even though they are fantastical, they still have kind of preset conditions that you have to conform to. It's not like you're able just to teleport through a wall and do something incredible that's almost miraculous in those worlds. You still have to conform to the rules and regulations. And I can kind of see how that reality to the religious fictionalist kind of embodies a sense of going to, say, a Catholic church to experience the Mass. There are rules and regulations. It's almost like they're able to understand and see their position and their role that they should be playing, because they're conforming to that which has been instantiated outside of them. So for us playing Dungeons and Dragons, that would be the rules that most of our decisions are made on a D20, a dice with 20 sides. We kind of roll the dice in the game, and you kind of have different outcomes depending on what the number is. Within the Catholic Mass, you know when you should be standing up or sitting down or kneeling, because there are rules and regulations that have been instantiated through how it's been set up. I'm aware this wasn't a question that I kind of prepped you for, but is that kind of giving the right sort of framework and right idea for how a religious fictionalist would engage with something like the Mass?
Yeah, I think it's clearly on the right track. It's I write in the paper that I discussed that one of the main differences, perhaps the main differences between religious fictionalism as a role-playing game and LARPing and other traditional role-playing games is the lack of a dungeon master who describes or controls the setting. And I think that you're right in assuming that a very similar function is performed by realist religion itself for the fictionalist. So the religion, as it is, sets the rules and the boundaries, and explains what is to be expected from the player. And it's also and in these expectations, the fictionalist will realize also that she has to role play. That role playing is not optional in fictionalism, and that because if you're a fictionalist, you're really an atheist, but you can't be that in the and partake in the religious setting as the setting demands. So you have to pretend to be someone else, a role character, which is probably a slightly different version of yourself, a religious version of yourself, which might differ in different degrees to who you really are.
It's so interesting, because you can imagine a sort of atheist that she goes to the Mass and she's just sitting down at the back of the church throughout the whole of it. She's not engaging. She's not there to kind of partake in the sort of realist religious tradition. She's just being there, I guess. But if she was to partake as a religious fictionalist, she would be engaging with it not because it's literally true, but because there is something that she's trying to attain in living out and being this character within this environment. I guess a sort of kind of caveat side question to this is almost like you kind of have this idea that a religious fictionalist must role play as a believer to sustain the game, almost. So a person attending Catholic Mass must role play as a believer to be able to maintain and get involved with what's happening to reach their goals, whatever those goals might be. But I guess this approach could kind of raise issues with things like cognitive dissonance or maintaining authenticity. Is that something that is just kind of an internal psychological kind of problem that the religious fictionists would have to engage with? Because I imagine those in the congregation wouldn't necessarily know that they are a religious fictionalist. So it must be a psychological conundrum for them to kind of grapple with. So how does the religious fictionalist kind of deal with these two elements?
It's clear that there are clearly some important issues here for the fictionalist role player. One is about their relation to the congregation or religious community in which she participates, and the other is about her own psychological states and her view of herself. So if we begin with her relation to the community, and this is a question which has been discussed somewhat in the literature. Well, some philosophers argue that the fictionalist should go to a kind of liberal congregation where she can be open with being a fictionalist, as to not deceive anyone. But then once again, it seems that there's conflicts with the immersion the fictionalist would want from her engagement. I mean, if you're, and from one perspective, if you're not believing, why not go whole the way and immerse fully with the most fully developed and traditional way of being religious, because in some way it seems that the liberal congregation is presumably liberal because it has difficulties believing some of the stuff that the more traditional congregation believes, and if you want the full experience, it seems to be reasonable to want to participate in the traditional congregation. But then, of course, you will be presumably be deceiving them, because it's not something they suspect, and presumably it will be looked down upon by the members of the conservative congregation. So that's an obvious problem. When it comes to the psychological side, there's well, first I think that the role-playing perspective kind of helps the fictionalist to keep the boundary between herself and the what she experiences as a role player, because she knows that this is a fiction, and when she enters the fiction, she's a character in that fiction, and she removes herself from the fiction, and she is herself again, and that would presumably be helpful. On the other side, there's something in LARPing known as the bleed-over effect, when when you pretend to be a character for a prolonged time. It can happen that thoughts and feelings from this character kind of bleeds over and stays with you after outside of the role-playing game. And that's a standard, most often considered something of a mental health issue amongst role players. So there might be some kind of danger involved in prolonged role playing, but on the other hand, these role players have developed techniques to avoid bleed over, or which basically means that you cannot role play for an infinitely long time. You have to stop role-playing at some point and be yourself and talk about the other players, about their experiences, and so forth. Yeah. So what this might suggest is that one very radical solution to both these problems would be that the best place to be a religious fictionalist might not be in church, but in a real live action role playing setting. So that it might be that the best place to be a religious role player is to play a religious character in some role-playing game rather than in a congregation. But I mean, on the other hand, this might not be what the fictionalist is after, and perhaps it's and I don't think it's the only way you can handle these problems, but that would be one radical solution.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this sort of bleed over or sort of bleed out effect that you mentioned for LARPing. Often at the end of a LARPing session, I've never actually done one, I have to say, but I've watched a few films that kind of have explored the phenomenon, which is kind of across the world now. It's incredible, but there's usually a sort of debrief afterwards where everybody sits down or spends time together post the LARPing session, as you mentioned, to talk about their experiences and what they got, what they didn't got, to almost allow them to slowly transition back into their everyday, standard person that they are. And I kind of wonder whether, this sort of bleed over effect for the religious fictionalist who's seeking, let's say, seeking goods or seeking resources that can only be found within a realist religion and tradition, such as, the Catholic Church, for instance. Could they kind of view these bleed over effects as a sort of way to kind of get at or increase their sort of moral or spiritual fruits that they're trying to achieve? Like these must be the sorts of things that they're trying to get at by being a religious fictionalist within a religious tradition. So I guess would they kind of view those difficulties, those psychological difficulties, as they're trying to transition from believer in roleplay to standard person leaving the church, as almost part of the reward of what they're trying to accomplish? Is that something that could work?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question, because I mean, this is precisely what happens in the bleed over effect, is that the fictional character bleeds over through the who you are as a person, and since and the moral and spiritual development, which will be which is what the fictionalist is often after, will be something that the fictional character actually gets rather than the person. It would seem almost vital to the fictionalist to transfer this moral and spiritual progress to herself in some way, and perhaps bleed over can be used in that regard. I mean, already Pascal suggested that the unbeliever should take Mass and participate in Catholic life as the best way of becoming a believer. But I mean, obviously also achieving the fruits of a religious life. So I mean, there's this really interesting question here. I mean, that LARPers talk about bleed over, it kind of proves that religious fictionalism works. that you can partake in a fiction in a way which deeply affects you as a person. So the question is if we should just be happy with this, or if we should take their warnings that this is some kind of mental health issue seriously and try to avoid it for that reason. I'm not sure which way is the best here, and I think that's something which I guess it really requires empirical work to find out if but I do think that if we decide to that it's too dangerous, we don't know what will happen here. We listen to the LARPers and we try to stay away from bleed over. I think what's important to say is that does not necessarily mean that religious fictionalism is not worthy of pursuing, because when we listen to, there have been inquiries into what LARPers perceive that they gain from role-playing, and it seems that many role players respond that they have received an increased empathy and increases in tolerance and for understanding other people and so forth from their role-playing experiences. So it could be so even that religious fictionalists could provide these kinds of benefits, even if we are hesitant to use the bleed over effect to let it transform us in the to be more like of role characters. We can still have this other kind of positive development. So it's so even if we are more cautious, there is no reason to abandon fictionalism.
If you want more ways to engage with the show, join our locals community. Membership is free and gives you access to all my updates, the reading plan, and early access to all audio-only versions of each episode. Supporters can ask guest questions, comment on posts, and get early access to all video versions of each episode. Your support is essential for the show's growth. The best way to support the show is through our locals community. You can also contribute via YouTube Super Thanks, PayPal, Substack, and even Bitcoin. All links are in the description, and thank you for helping us to continue to create content. That's so cool. I think as well we can kind of take it into quite a geeky or meta area here, and I think it would be interesting to play with this idea. So for those who don't know about Baldur's Gate 3, you kind of select a race, and then you select a class. So, you have this sort of, say you become a bard, for instance. And you can imagine that our religious fictionalist in their real life is, a certain class or a certain sort of person that could be a bard, a warrior, whatever it is. And what it sounds like you're saying here, Carl-Johan, is that it's almost like they load a sort of subclass that they kind of want to begin to level up and begin to experience things through, still remaining a bard or a warrior or that's like, say it's me, like just Sam, whoever it is, their main class is still their dominant position, but they're loading this side class to be able to begin to level it up and to try it out and to run it through and do quests and missions and get that experience, so that some of the stuff from this class is able to move over to their everyday standard self, because there's things that they can't achieve or experience or get, and they have to kind of almost sideload a class or a quest or a line of living to be able to become and hit the destinations or the achievements that they want to hit in their everyday life. I don't know, does that analogy help, do you think, or just make it more confusing?
I think it's a great analogy. Yeah. I think it's, especially if you feel that you're playing a role in your everyday life as well, I mean, then it's absolutely on spot.
Interesting, yeah. And there'll be some people here like, what the hell is Baldur's Gate? And they'll be Googling away. You should Google Baldur's Gate 3 and play it, whoever's not played it and is listening, for sure. I wanted to talk very briefly, before we move on to non-Doxasticism, I want to briefly just talk on the idea of sort of extended fictionalism and the sort of kind of, I guess, the balance between the individual's desire for these religious benefits, this class that they've sideloaded, with the honesty towards themselves and their community. Do you think it is possible for a religious fictionalist to be able to engage with something from, say they're 20 years old until the day that they pass away, and for almost nobody to ever really know that it was anything other than a sort of quest for them? Like, or do you think there are risks that they actually can't go deep enough because of the limits of their non-belief within reality?
Well, if we, first of all, we have to think of this person as someone who is not afraid of the bleed over effect, but who embraces it, and let the fiction transform him or herself. And in that case, it's sure possible. How I'm not sure how healthy it is in other aspects. But let's say that this is the only that the role character this person plays is very similar to herself, and that there's no major differences except her religious belief. She would have been mostly the same, even almost entirely the same, if she had not been a believer, except these transformations that she gets from her religious fictional engagement. Then surely seems possible, but I also think that this will raise the question, of course, if what will happen with her attitude along the way. Will she remain an unbeliever until she dies? Of course, she might be intellectually very stubborn, so that it might be possible. I think that it's a more realistic scenario would be that she might not become a believer, but I think that she might at least start to find the religious ideas she's entertaining in a fictional manner as somehow possible or probable, especially if we think that she constantly engages with other people who thinks they are not only probable but true, and tries to take their point of view, and presumably she will. So I think that the most realistic scenario is that she actually transform into an agnostic, in the sense required for non-doxasticism. So I think it would be reasonable to think that a very prolonged engagement with religion as a fictionalist would lead you over to non-doxasticism in the end. But of course that's on the view that or on the assumption that the religious environment she's a fictionalist in is not. That it's a reasonable religious environment where reasonable arguments for the existence of God are being seriously entertained and so on. Not that we're, I mean, if she's in a wacky religious environment where with not much of intellectual substance, she might, of course, not go through this intellectual development because she never finds any evidence or any argument which makes it at least the likely that the religious views are true, and that she might stay atheist for the whole duration. But I think that if she's in a more reasonable religious environment where she finds substantial, up-to-date intellectual considerations and arguments for the truth of the religious, I think that will presumably change. But that is also on the assumption that most hardcore atheists have not considered the arguments from the other side enough. So I mean, if you don't think that's the case, but that you think that the all things considered case will always be atheist, perhaps you will not agree with me, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it just goes back to kind of the point we were speaking about before, how that it needs to be a realist religious tradition for it to make sense almost. Like if it was like a wacky crystal cult over the other side, they're all just kind of like, you know, healing crystals and hot water and this sort of stuff, and it's all very woo-woo. It's not going to hit the right things for this person to want to even engage with it to start with. It's almost like it has to be a sort of quite a conservative, quite well-established environment that has a theology, that has a creed maybe, that has a sort of a set of beliefs that they espouse. Yeah, it's really interesting. We've kind of mentioned the word non-doxasticism a few times in this conversation. Carl-Johan, would you mind explaining what non-doxasticism is?
Yeah, sure. So, like fictionalism, it's an approach to religion which does not require belief, but it's a more realist take. So instead of belief, non-doxasticism builds on epistemically weaker attitudes such as hope or acceptance, resumption, or the like. So instead of believing, say, that God exists, the non-doxasticist hopes or assumes. And many philosophers think that this kind of attitude is enough for it to actually count as religious faith in a quite literal sense. So yeah, so and here the important thing is that you see so the religious worldview as a live possibility, as something that could be true. So it's not for the outright atheist, but more for the agnostic.
Interesting. Okay. And I guess, would we say that religious fictionalism and non-doxasticism complement each other, or do they kind of represent fundamentally different approaches to engaging with religion? Like, from the way the conversation's gone, you could almost imagine somebody starting out as a religious fictionalist and then kind of beginning to employ things like non-doxasticism as it becomes more and more of a live possibility. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, the fundamental difference between the two approaches is that the fictionalist, for the fictionalist, the truth is irrelevant for the fictionalist use of religious propositions, while it is most certainly relevant for the non-doxasticist. So the non-doxasticist wants religion to be true, and it is based on the possibility that it might be true. So while fictionalism is fully compatible with atheism and naturalism, Non-Doxasticism is not, and it requires that you view the religious worldview as a life possibility, and that you are at least agnostic whether this possibility is true or not. But you cannot have outright belief either, because then you're no longer a non-Doxasticist. So it's when you're in this middle territory between, and you have neither disbelief or belief, then you can be a non-Doxasticist. And the fiction, this is a huge difference between the non-Doxasticist and the fictionalist. So it might be helpful to think about it that fictionalist is for atheists, and if you're an agnostic, you can always engage with non-doxastic religion instead, which will bring you presumably more satisfying, because it's a more realist approach. But then, of course, you can always complicate the picture by saying that one and the same person could presumably be fictionalists about some part of the religious worldview, and non-doxasticists about others. I mean, you might be agnostic concerning the existence of God, but outright disbelieve that Jesus was God incarnated, perhaps. And then you can be a non-doxasticist about God and a fictionalist about Jesus, if you're engaged in a Christian setting.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I want to share my screen very briefly. Let me just make sure I find the right window here. Okay, cool. So, I mean, this is really around the sort of criteria that determine whether a proposition is a legitimate candidate for non-doxastic commitment. So this is pulled directly from one of your papers. I'll link all 3 papers in the description, so viewer, listener, you've got all the resources there to go away and engage with. I'm just going to read this out, Carl-Johan, because some people listen rather than watch, and then I'll pass it over to you just to walk us through this. So, in short, S has a non-doxastic pro-attitude towards some proposition P if the following 2 conditions are met. ND1. S desires the truth of P, or considers that P being true is an overall good thing. And then ND2. S believes P to be epistemically possible and neither believes nor disbelieves P. Would you mind just kind of walking us through this so we really understand what is a legitimate candidate for a non-doxastic commitment?
Yeah, yes. So if we see here the first of these conditions, which is that S must desire the truth of P or consider it to be an overall good thing, that's about the motivation. You have to, because there's nothing, of course, which demands of a person to be non-doxastic adherent of religion. So you have to make this, take it up in a voluntary sense, and for that to make sense, you have to think it would be good for the proposition in question to be true. And the second is about epistemic possibility. You have to think that this is possible, that the proposition, for example, God exists, is true. But you cannot disbelieve or believe it, because obviously then you will move over to atheism or being a believer. So that this is really the most fundamental demands on something for it to be possible to have a non-doxastic engagement with it. And what is also exciting about these two conditions is that they coincide with the standard account of hope, which is analyzed as being constituted by a desire and the belief that something is possible, which suggests, I think, that hope is the most basic attitude you can in a non-Doxasticism. So even if you have a more composite attitude like non-Doxastic faith, or if you have an attitude like acceptance or assumption, it will be based on a hope. So the non-Doxasticist, I say, hopes that the religious worldview or the religious proposition is true.
That's really helpful, thank you. Let me just get rid of that. Okay, so I guess, people holding both a naturalistic and a supernatural view are often considered irrational, or compartmentalized potentially. We've already mentioned the sort of bleed over effect, and this is obviously a psychological problem that people can experience. So I guess it'd be interesting to understand how non-Doxasticism can help us to understand the spiritual but not the religious in light of this.
Yeah. So in some of my, I've written a paper about how the semi-secular, as some of the semi-secular part of the population, which is those who are not quite religious in the traditional sense, but who are not fully atheist or naturalist either, how these people, or some of these people, can be understood from a non-Doxastic perspective. And I think that this is an area where non-Doxasticism is really a helpful analyzing tool to understand this kind of religiosity, because most research which has been done on semi-secularity and has been done by sociologists and religious studies, and they often don't have this quite this elaborate terminology, but instead tends to treat all kinds of the views they encounter as fully believed, and that will often result in the problem, or that these views will be regarded as irrational, especially in cases where an individual holds several views simultaneously. For example, in the sociological study which I explored in this paper, Swedish sociologist Anna found out that many semi-secular people simultaneously hold supernatural and naturalistic explanations of the very same events. For example, there was this man who was in a motorcycle accident, which he kind of miraculously survived, and he at the same time held the explanation that he had really evolutionary well developed self-preservation skills, and that he was saved by guardian angels. And obviously it would have been irrational to believe both these things at the same time. But if we take a closer look on what these people say, it does not seem that they actually believe these things. It is rather the case that they entertain different epistemic possibilities at the same time. So while it would be clearly irrational to believe incoherent things, nothing prevents us from non-doxastically accepting two competing ideas simultaneously. I mean, it would be like when a scientist who is unsure which of the theories is the correct proceeds with both theories in mind during his experiments. And I think that the semi-secular persons who have the two competing explanations, like the man who both thought that he had great self-preservation skills and was saved by guardian angels, should treat that kind of thinking as analogous to this, to a scientist who have two theories, to proceed with two theories without believing any of them, and not as a compartmentalized or irrational kind of person. So it's and I mean, it's also the case that non-doxastic attitude demands much less in terms of justification to be irrational. And I think many of the ideas which are entertained by the spiritual but not religious, they might be a bit hard perhaps to defend belief in them, but I think that it's a whole other thing to defend the idea that they represent epistemic possibilities, and that they are therefore viable candidates for non-doxasticism.
Okay, so that's really interesting. I mean, we're kind of essentially saying here that non-doxasticism is kind of showing us kind of things that we might have been aware about for sort of traditional epistemology, but kind of also challenging some of our assumptions or some of our sort of ways of viewing the world. I mean, does it challenge or expand kind of classic understanding of belief and knowledge? Like, is that kind of where non-doxasticism is taking us within the literature?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it, or at least it should be. There are unfortunately not many philosophers in mainstream epistemology who has properly taken up non-doxasticism. Jonathan Cohen is one of the few examples we have who write the essay, an essay on belief and acceptance in the 1990s. But after that there has been very little work on non-doxastic attitude, and that's really a shame, because they operate under different conditions of rationality. And I think that this epistemological landscape between unbelief and belief has not been sufficiently investigated. And it's also clear that there's a lack of systematic investigation here, because even these attitudes which are suitable in the non-doxastic attitudes, they are treated in several different disciplines and not in connection to each other. So hope is primarily treated in what's called moral psychology. We have trust, which is primarily treated in, or at least epistemic trust, which is primarily treated in social epistemology, and faith in philosophy of religion. And then we got the negative attitudes like fear and distrust, which are not not treated at all. So there's a clear lacuna in the literature here, and I think it's really important to fill this, because, I mean, for example, one of the main things you want to use beliefs for is to explain actions. So in the standard model of understanding actions, we explain actions with beliefs and desires. The beliefs that the person had at the time she acted, and the desires she had. Now, what's interesting here is that different non-doxastic attitudes might be indistinguishable from this point of view. For example, fear and hope might be based on the very same desire and the very same belief about that something is possible. For example, you suffer from cancer, and you have a belief that it is epistemically possible that you will get well, and you decide to get well. But this does not explain if you fear death or if you hope to get better. I mean, perhaps you shift between these two attitudes, but the belief plus desire model says really cannot distinguish between them, and that's and therefore it cannot really predict whether you will act in fear or hope. And it also seems that fear and hope has different kind of requirements when it comes to rational action, because it seems that we require more in terms of probability when it comes to fear than when it comes to hope. If you refuse to board a plane because you are afraid that it might crash, fear flight, and it's very unlikely that this will happen, we often think that this is an irrational fear, and this person is irrational. But a person which on the very same probability buys a lottery ticket on the hope that she will win the lottery, we tend to claim that this is completely rational. There's nothing wrong with buying the lottery ticket. And that shows that there are aspects for these non-doxastic attitudes which falls completely outside the scope of the belief-desire model. So, I mean, that's just one example of how I think that neglecting non-doxastic attitudes really, we should not neglect the non-doxastic attitudes in epistemology, because it will lead to they have an impact which we cannot capture in the traditional theories.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think this kind of feeds quite nicely into sort of kind of society as a whole, especially in the 21st century. We're so materialistic, and science has done such wonders for us over the last 300-400 years. It's advanced so many things. We kind of, I think, view the world through a lens of black or white, whether a policy is left or right, whatever it is. There's different ways that we navigate the world, and it's almost like we want a tool to tell us whether it's something we should believe or shouldn't believe, and we don't allow enough space for the sort of the grey to emerge. And I think especially when you begin to look at kind of like epistemological stances for you as an individual, and then you look at those in your family and those in your community, and you realize that there is so much grey within those spaces. It's actually incredible. Like, very few people can live a purely no, not that, yes, that, no, not that, yes, that. I mean, I guess that's why people adhere to kind of very, very strict naturalistic atheism or extremely conservative Christianity, because they're almost worldviews that you can begin to get given, and you just kind of have to follow a path. I'm not saying that's strictly true, but I think people sometimes adopt them because they seem as if they are going to be able to help you navigate, epistemology or whatever landscape it is that you need to adhere to within your life or begin to unpack. But I think you're absolutely right. There is this massive grey space, and we kind of negate that at our own peril. I think very often it's quite a shame. I don't know. I've got another question. I've got another few questions. Was there anything you wanted to say on that before we push ahead?
No, I think that this is clearly an epistemological part of that picture. That we tend to operate with clear dichotomies and the whole spectrum of phenomena which are between these the extreme poles are so easily neglected, and I think that the non-doxastic attitudes are one such kind of phenomena in. And I think that shows how epistemology is also perhaps a bit, yeah.
I was just going to say it all comes back to what you said right at the start about non-doxasticism. It's a live, tenable option. It doesn't mean that you're fully committed on it. You're not, no, this is the only option, but it's an option that's on the table and it's not been removed from the table yet. And that's what makes it a really interesting space. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to understand kind of how non-doxasticism affects religious rituals and practices, or the sense of community for those that are adhering through a non-doxastic lens.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that the as compared to fictionalism, I think there will be much less difference between the realist and the believer and the non-doxasticist as compared to the fictionalist and the believer, because the non-doxasticist engages with the rituals and with the religious community and so forth, with the hope that this might bring her into contact with divine reality. Of course, a hope is not a strong ground for action as belief is, but I think it's in most cases it will be a sufficient ground for action, and the non-doxasticists' hope will make all this kind of things available to her in roughly the same way as they are available to the believer.
If you're looking for more ways to enjoy our content, check out the YouTube channel for full-length videos, or explore our Rumble channel for an alternative video platform. You can also listen to the podcast in your favourite feed, and while you're there, please leave a positive and written review. It helps others to find the show. Lastly, you can read all my essays over on Substack, and by signing up, each new instalment will be delivered straight to your inbox. All links are in the description, and thank you for following along. I want to, jump back into this idea of kind of binaries of sort of black and white. I want to kind of talk about polytheism, representing a live possibility through the non-doxastic lens. In your paper, you do a really interesting job of kind of exploring the differences between general polytheism and then specific pantheons, and how general polytheism is a feasible path for modern Neopagans given non-doxasticism, but specific pantheons are not, because it's almost like it's too refined or viewed or cut and dry. So would you mind just exploring that entire space for us?
Yeah. So I've explored whether polytheism or Neopaganism, which I understand in terms of polytheism, could represent a live possibility. And I answer that question in the affirmative, but I do suggest that rather than committed to a specific pantheon, such as the Old Norse deities or some such, we should prefer a more general polytheism, where we think it's a live possibility that some pantheon exists, without perhaps saying very much about the identity of the gods, at least not in a literal way. And why should we prefer this general polytheism? Well, first, it's simply a matter of probability. It is just much more likely that some pantheon exists compared to the probability that a specific historical pantheon exists. It's so it's and it's also the case that if any of the historical pantheons happen to exist, we will kind of be on the right. We'll certainly be on the right track, and the proposition a pantheon exists will obviously be true. So we will kind of have found the right view, even if it would happen that one of these ancient mythologies is actually correct. And secondly, this idea that we should be general pantheists, it could be argued that even the old pagans themselves, like the old Romans, had this idea, as they constantly identified the gods of other cultures with their own gods. Most famously is their identification of their own gods with the Greek gods, like with Jupiter with Zeus and Neptune with Poseidon. But they also identified more foreign pantheons with their own. For example, the Germanic Odin was identified with Mercury for some reason. So it's very much in line with that kind of thinking to suggest that we should be general polytheists. And furthermore, we can also ask if there's really conceptual space for more than one pantheon. And I think that this is presumably the kind of thinking the Romans had. Can there be more than one god of the sea? Can there be more than one goddess of love? Since these gods are most often connected with some specific domain of reality, it seems implausible to suggest that there are many gods who are in control of the same area or her. And then, I think that there are many reasons to suggest that we should be a general polytheist rather than embrace some specific pantheon.
That's really interesting. I had a few thoughts flying through my head just then, and the first one was, if you look at the Apostle Paul in Acts 17, I think, he's talking to a group of individuals at Athens, and he sees an inscription of a god, but it's to the unknown god. It's like an altar almost, and then he obviously kind of pulls that and kind of says, this is Jesus, and talks about Jesus. So it's interesting. Like you do see space within pantheons for the unknown to be able to be welcomed in, and then kind of basically immortalized in whatever setting that they become immortalized in, like they become a known worship god and they have their own temple eventually, but there's still space for the unknown, which is really fascinating. And as you mentioned just then, like, is there space for there to be a god of the sky, a god of the thunder, a god of the ocean, these different gods? You could almost envision like a sort of multiverse situation where each multiverse was its own separate ontological space where different pantheons of gods could theoretically reign. Like, you could think of, like, so take Marvel as the example, right? There's that famous bit where Thanos clicks his fingers and half the people turn to dust, but then these people sort of reappear as they're able to be pulled in through different multiverses where they're existing in very similar but slightly different realms. And I kind of wonder whether that sort of idea could work within sort of, kind of neo-pantheism or pantheism of some sort for neo-pagans trying to explore pantheism. It's really interesting. But putting that aside, that's just me rambling, I think it'd be interesting. We kind of spoke about the Catholic Mass and traditional religions, realist traditional religions. I think it'd be interesting to talk about the importance to neo-pagans about the idea of sort of the deeply symbolic and cultural resemblances that their stories embody for them. And I kind of wonder whether if somebody was trying to approach the pantheons through a non-doxastic lens, trying to engage with their myths, trying to engage with their fictions for worship, kind of how they would reconcile that with non-doxasticism. Like, would that pose a challenge, or would they be able to still hold it because it's potentially a live possibility? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's clearly that the most probable possibility is that the more general that a pantheon exists. I mean, but of course, it might be possible to argue that it is at least an epistemic possibility in a very wide sense that some specific pantheon exists. It's sometimes fruitful to draw a distinction between epistemic possibility in a wide and a narrow sense. In a narrow sense, we think that it should be a live possibility. It should have an actual chance of being true. A non-negligible chance of being true, as it is sometimes formulated. But in the wider sense, we can say that everything that which we do not know with certainty to be false is epistemically possible. And I mean, in that sense, I guess that a lot of different pantheons could be viewed as live possibilities. However, I'm not sure that that's a possibility enough for a religious commitment, because I think that you really want to have a live possibility rather than just an epistemic possibility in the wide sense. However, I do think that, I mean, obviously, religious myths and symbols have a very, I mean, they're very important for worship, especially on paganism. And I don't suggest that we let our general, if we are neo-pagans, then I don't think that our general polytheism should affect our worship. But I think that the most reasonable thing, I think, is to treat the specific myths as useful fictions, and which we use in rituals, to uphold tradition, to myths to understand life and so forth, but not as literally true, but as fictions which help us in. So I mean, that's also a way of combining non-doxasticism and fictionalism, like viewing the more fundamental view about divine reality as an epistemic possibility, which we have a non-doxastic commitment to, and the religious myths and the stories which makes the ritual make sense. We view them as useful fictions. And I mean, this I think that while some Neopagans might be hesitant to this idea, I think it's also it will also have an advantage, because it can help different Neopagan groups to collaborate, and because it suggests that they really have the same metaphysical view and only differ in the details of their worship, so that the Icelandic Asatru would really be the same religion as the Baltic Romova, but with different fictions and different rituals.
Yeah, interesting. It's almost like it's got the same core, but the sort of makeup of it on the outside is different. I mean, I was going to kind of ask you about the sort of, I guess, where we should cast our net for a legitimate candidate for non-doxastic focus. You could look at something like perfect being theism or general polytheism, but I kind of wonder whether something like deism or pantheism would make a more fitting candidate, because they are more generalized, so they could be more readily accepted as a live possibility potentially. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made for the most general view, and that argument has been made by John Schellenberg, who suggests that we should commit non-doxastically to the most general religious view, which he thinks is the view that there's the deepest ultimate reality, which is metaphysically, exiologically, and soteriologically ultimate. I mean, so that's obviously a candidate. I think that this view is perhaps overly cautious to go that far, and that details matter for religion, and that we want to strike a balance perhaps between detail and probability, and that Schellenberg's proposal is certainly at one end of the spectrum, but like if you commit non-doxastically to a specific pagan religion, would be on the other end. So I would say that I think that it helps a lot religiously if we have some more elaborate idea about what ultimate reality really is, like theism or polytheism, or is it perhaps an impersonal ultimate? Perhaps we should even go so far as to say whether if we are theists, perhaps we should even go so far to say that we could embrace the Trinity if we want to engage in Christian religion. But on the other hand, it does not seem to make very much sense if we engage in Christian religion to go all the way and view and embrace some sectarian, very very specific fringe group. But I mean, what we want is of course a view which is a live possibility because we very much care about the truth. And I think that for measuring whether a view is a suitable candidate here, I think that we could compare it to theism. At least that's the method I use in my paper on paganism. Because I think that it's reasonable to think that theism is a live possibility. And I think that, for example, because theism is so hotly debated and has been so hotly debated for so long, and it just does not seem feasible to suggest that it should be that the view can be so much debated if it is so implausible that not many would regard it as a live possibility. I mean, obviously not all regard it as a live possibility. There are hardcore atheists after all, but I think that even if you don't believe that God exists, you would want some reason to believe that God does not exist, and you want to be convinced by these reasons, because from the beginning it seems like it's like a possibility, and perhaps even after you consider the reason, you still think it's a possibility, even if you do not believe. So taking for granted that theism is a live possibility, one way of exploring whether other alternatives are live possibilities is to compare them with theism. And compare them how well they can handle the arguments for and against the existence of God. For example, can polytheism, how does polytheism fare with respect to the teleological argument that which says that it's likely that God exists because we live in an ordered world, and surely someone must have ordered it, and therefore God. I mean, there are much more sophisticated modern versions like the fine-tuning argument, but I mean, that's basically what it says. And then we see that one feature of the teleological argument, which was acknowledged already by Hume and later by Plantinga, is that the teleological argument, which claims that the universe is designed, says nothing about the number of designers, and it therefore seems that it is points to theism as much as it points to polytheism, and that it does not favor one above the other. And I would even say that there are, using this method to explore other arguments, we can even see that there are arguments which makes us want to prefer polytheism over monotheism. And I think that the argument of evil is a good example of such an argument, because I mean, it's if there exists a God who is almighty and perfectly good, we have to explain why there exists suffering in the world. At least that seems like a mystery in such a world. But if we instead think that there are many gods, none of which is perfectly good, and none of which is almighty, which has dominions over different aspects of reality, and which might sometimes even clash with each other, it should not be mysterious that there is suffering in the world, because there is no one committed to prevent it, and we can always expect there to be conflicts between the gods, which might result in things happening for us mortals, which we should wish to avoid, because it brings suffering. So there I think we have at least one reason to think that polytheism is a live possibility, because it's if monotheism, which fares worse with respect to this problem, is a live possibility, then surely polytheism should be as well.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. It's been really interesting exploring religious fictionalism and non-Doxasticism. I mean, these approaches involve a form of commitment without belief. And I think the last couple of questions I really want to dive into here today are around the sort of I guess the first one's around the sort of nature of commitment. I mean, it'd be interesting to understand, Carl-Johan, what does this tell us about the evolving nature of religious or spiritual identity now that we live in the West, especially in, it seems to be ever increasing secular societies?
I think that I mean, the reason that we should be interested in these beliefless approaches to religion in the first place, I mean, that's because we live in these secularized societies, and I think that if we and that's why we need them. If we lived in a time and age where religious belief was easy to come by and uphold, there would be no sense in preferring a non-doxastic or fictional engagement with religion over a belief-based engagement. So this is purely approaches which, with a goal of letting us keep religion going in a time where belief is becoming increasingly hard to come by, especially for reflecting individuals with access to the contemporary ideas in various disciplines. So
yeah, I could also really imagine that the fictionalist and the non-doxastic adherents are going to be facing probably some quite substantial pushbacks and I don't know, I guess dismissiveness about their views from both the sort of kind of theist or believer and also the sort of secular skeptic. They're walking a very fine line, this sort of grey space that we've mentioned before. I mean, how do you think that an individual who does take up fictionalism or non-doxasticism to begin to pursue belief in some way, or to play into belief in some way, let's say, how do you think they should prepare for and then respond to both those two sides coming at their views?
Well, I think that one way of preparing, or perhaps at least a reason to not feel overly threatened by this antagonists would be to have a clear view of current state of affairs in the secular world. And I mean, the famous philosopher of secularization, Charles Taylor, he has claimed that it is only the agnostic who is torn between belief and disbelief who properly understands where we stand currently with respect to any transcendent reality that there might be. And he has also suggested that these environments which still foster hardcore atheists or traditional believers are out of touch with the contemporary age. And I think that's something for the non-doxasticists to take at heart, I think. Well, so if this is true, it's which I personally think that it is. It should be encouraging in the way that the non-doxastic should feel that her stance is the proper stance for the future. And when it comes to fictionalists, I mean, fictionalists or atheists, right? So they might not be happy with that kind of response. But I think that the traditional believer should be happy that there are fictionalists, and I mean, they don't clearly. I mean, there's of course this question about whether they are deceived of the fictionalists among them and so forth. But for those who are, I mean, I don't think they have any good reason to be anti-fictionalists, because the fictionalist is just trying to get as much religion as she can in her beliefless state. I mean, that's how the believers should view it, and I don't think they should be annoyed by that. And to the atheist, I think that the fictionalist should ask the question if they really are sure that lack of belief should prevent us from partaking in religion on our own terms. I mean, it's just there might be an old idea that this you have to believe to be religious, but I mean, let's just question that idea. And see, I mean, it's clearly possible to be religious without belief, and if it's possible, and if it brings benefits which are hard to achieve otherwise, and if it lets us partake in a tradition which has formed our culture for so long, why should we refrain from doing that? Because some quite arbitrary requirement that religion must come with belief. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously an argument the non-doxastic can use as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think religious fictionalism and non-doxasticism are far more prevalent than many actually realise. It's a really interesting space to watch the next 10, 15, 20 years, to see how things change, and hopefully to see how these thoughts and these papers that you've written and that you'll go on to write more, I'm sure, and the conversations that are going to happen around this stuff, I think is quite exciting. So I guess in that vein, Carl-Johan, where can people go and find you and follow along with your work to get hold of these papers? They'll be in the description, but also to follow you into the future for the other papers and the other conversations that I'm sure you're going to have.
Yeah, well, for now, I think that the best way to find my work is by simply searching for it at Google Scholar, because it's all there. And since I'm a Swedish researcher, it's almost most of the papers are open access, since that's the policy of our universities. So you can find my work there, and you can also check me out at Lund University's homepage, the philosophical department.
Sweet. I'll make sure there are links to those in the description. And Carl-Johan, it's been a blast. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been really great.
Cheers. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed it and are on YouTube or Rumble, please like, subscribe, and then hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a new episode. And don't forget to check out our community over on Locals. Cheers.